it's a great pleasure for me to introduce another of our very great teachers, Harry Oldmeadow. Harry is a veteran educator and writer, the author of many, many books on religion and tradition and the perennialist philosophers. He was the coordinator of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department at the Trobe University and continues to write and share his knowledge with us all. He's written the introduction to Closer Than Breathing, and please welcome him to say a few words for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tegan. You haven't left very much for me to say. Magnificent speech, and you did justice to the book, which is a very difficult thing to do. Now, for reasons best known to herself, if they're known at all, Beck has asked me to say a few words. So here I am. When we met a couple of weeks ago, Beck was reminiscing that this project had taken 7 years. In fact, we learned it took more than that, because 10 years writing before that, so really 17 years, but 7 years is long enough. And she said this with a sort of gentle sigh, as you say, it's been a long journey. Well, I recounted to her the story of my meeting with my first publisher in Sri Lanka. I sent him a manuscript in 1990, and I went to visit him in 2000, so 10 years later. And the book had just been published, so it took 10 years. And I said to my friend Ranjit, it's taken a long time, 10 years. He looked aghast, gave me a steely look. He said, what do you mean a long time? He said, don't you know that the god Brahma takes more than 20 years to blink? So I've produced your book in less than a blink of an eye. Well, it's a funny thing, time, isn't it? It's all relative. At the same meeting with Beck, I made a reckless and foolish promise. I don't know what came over me. Unsolicited, I promised to speak for no more than 10 minutes. I mean, how foolish can you get? Anyway, I'm bound by that promise. You've been to those meetings where the speaker approaches the podium with a kind of sheaf of notes, sort of riffling through 20 or 30 pages, and you feel rather nervous. You think, oh my goodness, how long am I going to have to listen to this character for? Well, here are my notes for today, ladies and gentlemen, so it will be brief. On previous occasions, I've recalled Cicero's excellent observation: brevity is the charm of eloquence. Now, Cicero doesn't tell us what happens when you have brevity without the eloquence, but I figure brevity in such circumstances is still preferable to the alternative. So I can promise you brevity, if not eloquence. Logan Pearsall Smith, the American jurist. People say life is the thing. I prefer reading. An excellent observation, a very sage observation, except for the fact that reading is living. So reading and life are not separate. And reading is actually life at its fullest. Because after all, here it is that we enter the world of the imagination, which gives us access to all sorts of things which we wouldn't otherwise be able to experience. And of course I use imagination in the Coleridgean sense, which is to say that the imagination is that faculty by which we are able to apprehend truths and realities of a supra-mundane, supra-sensorial kind. So it's one of our most precious faculties, and it's what we engage when we read. One of my students some years ago said to me that she enjoyed reading, but she felt guilty when she was reading. I said, look, for goodness sake, why is that? And she said, well, I feel like I ought to be doing other things. And I said, well, you've got the whole thing upside down and inside out. You should feel guilty when you're not reading. There's the old adage, don't judge a book by its cover. I mean, what a ridiculous notion. Don't judge a book by its cover. For goodness sake, All we have to do is look at the cover of this book, which Stephen's been brandishing in front of you, and we will be well aware of what's within. The cover announces a treasure, a gem inside. Of course, Beck and Kane and others like them belong in a long and honourable tradition going back at least to the Luddites. Figures have been much ridiculed at the time and ever since. But of course those of us with any sense at all know that the Luddites were right. That mechanisation and industrialisation alienated workers from their work, drove a wedge between art and craft, created a multitude of new slaves, and along with a whole of other things, desecrated the environment. The Harebrained Press is a noble and heroic gesture of defiance, and I applaud it. Now, I must warn you, one thing you need to know about this book. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but to the best of my knowledge, Beck and Kane did not employ a sensitivity editor. You know about sensitivity editors, do you? There's been a lot about it in the media lately in reference to Roald Dahl's books, which I actually find are quite awful books and I have no desire to read them. But this business of changing the text so that no one will be offended is completely appalling. So no sensitivity editor here, you'll have to take your chances. Beck and Kane, we honour your vision. We admire your persistence, your tenacity in the face of many obstacles. We're enthralled by your stories and we are touched, moved, inspired by your handiwork. So, all strength to you. Borghese, the Argentinian, is he? Argentinian, somewhere over there. The Nobel laureate, novelist. He said, I always imagined paradise to be a kind of library. Now hopefully we'll all get into that library one day. But in the meanwhile, we can sample the sort of thing we might find in the Paradisal Library by reading Beck's book. Thank you very much. Yeah.